It started on one of those lazy, golden Saturdays where everything just clicks. The kind where the smell of sunscreen mixes with freshly cut grass, and the buzz of distant lawnmowers somehow makes the silence even more perfect. Our backyard had turned into a little paradise. My son Jason had invited 2 of his friends over, and they were splashing around in the pool, tossing a beach ball back and forth while the radio played some early 2000s rock I hadn't heard in years. The kind of weekend that makes you feel like life is under control. That I was flipping burgers on the grill, sipping an iced tea, just enjoying the simple pleasure of knowing the hardest decision I had to make that afternoon was whether or not to use barbecue sauce. That's when I heard the voice, "Really? You locked the gate now?" It wasn't a question. It was a complaint dressed up like one. Karen, every neighborhood has one. Ours came with a blonde bob haircut, an entitled attitude, and a permanent squint that somehow made every sentence sound accusatory. She lived 3 houses down and had always treated our street like her own personal HOA, even though we didn't have one. Karen had opinions about everyone's lawn, garage door colors, and apparently, now, our pool. She stood by the side fence, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, clearly irritated that the pool gate was locked. "It's for safety," I called over, as calmly as I could. "Liability and all that." Karen huffed. "It's just a gate. I've used it before. What's the big deal?" I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over to the fence. "Well, that's kind of the point. People have used it before. And some of them didn't ask first." She blinked, clearly not used to being called out directly. "You think I'm some stranger off the street? We're neighbors." "You are. But it's still private property." She scoffed, muttered something under her breath about neighborhood spirit, and walked off. I figured that was the end of it. That I was wrong. Later that day, I went inside to take a quick phone call. Jason and the boys were still outside, listening to music and lounging in the shallow end. It wasn't more than 15 minutes before I heard yelling. Not playful yelling, sharp, aggravated. That I stepped outside to see Karen, yes, Karen, in our pool. Fully in. Hair wet. Floating on one of our pool loungers like she'd been invited. Jason stood near the gate, arms crossed, looking every bit his father's son. "I told her she couldn't come in," he said as soon as he saw me. "She waited till you went inside and came through the back gate. Said she was too hot not to swim. Too hot to respect boundaries," I muttered. Karen smiled, like she had the moral high ground. "It's over 90 degrees out. I was practically dying out here. You could have asked." She shrugged. "Well, I figured I'd just cool off real quick and be on my way. No harm done." I looked over at Jason. "How did she even get in?" "She came through the side fence, must have noticed you forgot to latch it. So when she got in the pool, I went ahead and locked the pool gate from the outside. I'm not trying to get sued if she slips." Karen suddenly sat up. "Wait, what? You locked me in?" Jason raised an eyebrow. "You locked yourself in. It's a safety latch. Push it open from your side." Karen got out, dripping, walked to the gate, and pushed. Nothing. Jason hadn't been bluffing. "It's deadbolt now," he added, holding up the key. "You weren't supposed to be in here, remember?" "You little brat," she shouted, the panic in her voice creeping in. "This is illegal. You're holding me hostage." "You trespassed," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We can unlock it, but you need to leave." Karen turned her glare on me. "I'm calling the police." "Karen, please," I sighed. "Let's not turn this into a scene." But she was already fumbling with her phone, her wet fingers struggling with the screen. 911, what's your emergency?" "Yes, I'm trapped. I'm being held against my will in my neighbor's backyard. They locked the pool gate. There's a teenager threatening me." Jason looked at me like he was witnessing a new species in the wild. "No, ma'am," she continued on the phone, her voice rising. "I did not have permission to be here. That's not the point. I could hear the dispatcher on the other end trying to calm her down. Karen hung up and pointed a trembling finger at Jason. You're in so much trouble. Juvenile detention. That's where you're going. Jason looked unimpressed. For what? Enforcing trespassing laws. You assaulted me with a pool gate. I locked it. With a key. You weren't supposed to be here. I sat down in one of the patio chairs, not even sure how to process what I was watching. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so incredibly awkward. About 15 minutes later, we heard the approaching wail of sirens. Two patrol cars pulled up. I stood, took a deep breath, and prepared to explain what I was pretty sure was going to be the weirdest police conversation of my life. The officers came around the back gate. One was older, salt and pepper hair, calm expression. The other looked fresh out of the academy. Karen immediately ran to the fence, towel wrapped around her like a toga. Thank God. Officers, I was trapped inside this pool by that boy. The older officer blinked. You were trapped? Yes. They locked the gate while I was swimming. Look. I'm soaked. I could have drowned. Jason muttered, in 3 feet of water. The younger officer suppressed a grin that I stepped forward, hands visible, calm. Sir, if I may, my son locked the gate because Karen entered the pool without permission. She came through the side yard. This is private property. I was inside when it happened. The officer looked at me, then back at Karen. Did you have permission to enter their yard, ma'am? She faltered. No, but, he raised a hand. Did anyone physically stop you from leaving? I was locked in. The officer tried the gate. Jason had since unlocked it. He opened it with a soft click. It opens just fine now. Karen blushed. Well, it wasn't opening earlier. He had the key. It's a safety gate, I explained. We had a latch added after some kids wandered in from the street last summer. The older officer nodded. Pretty standard, honestly. Karen's jaw dropped. So that's it? You're not going to arrest him? For what exactly? The officer asked. Securing his own property? I don't see any crime here. Karen fumed, but she was outnumbered and clearly losing ground. I could have been hurt. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. From floating? Jason chuckled. That's what I said. The officers didn't laugh, but they didn't stop smiling either. Karen stormed off without another word, grabbing her sandals and mumbling about calling a lawyer. One of the officers turned back to me. Just keep your gate latched, sir. Sounds like your kid's got a good head on his shoulders. I thanked them both, and they left. Jason looked at me, still holding the pool key. Think she'll try it again? Probably not today, I said. But let's install that second lock tomorrow, just in case. Jason grinned, tossed the key onto the table, and went back to his friends, who were now recounting the entire scene like it was the greatest thing that had ever happened in suburbia. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of them laughing again, the radio humming quietly in the background, and the soft splash of water as they jumped back in. Peace, for now, but something told me Karen wasn't done. Not yet. By Monday morning, I had almost convinced myself that the whole thing would blow over. Karen had made a fool of herself, the cops hadn't taken her seriously, and with any luck, embarrassment alone would be enough to keep her off our property for good. That's what a normal person would do, anyway, cut their losses and move on, but Karen wasn't normal. Karen was persistent. And she hated losing. I was pouring coffee in the kitchen when I spotted her through the front window. She was in her driveway, talking to someone who looked vaguely familiar, a man in his 40s, tall, dressed in khakis and a blue polo. They weren't smiling. Karen was doing most of the talking, her hands moving in big dramatic gestures like she was telling a courtroom drama to a jury of one. I didn't think much of it until later that afternoon, when I checked the mailbox and found a folded letter tucked inside, not mailed, just dropped in. It was from the HOA. Technically, we weren't under any HOA regulations that had legal teeth. Ours was a volunteer group that mostly sent out seasonal newsletters and tried to coordinate Christmas lights. But somehow, Karen had convinced the self-appointed board to take a closer look at our backyard security measures. The letter was polite but firm. Several neighbors have raised concerns about restricted access to shared spaces. Shared spaces? That was rich. Our pool wasn't a park bench. It was 15 feet from our living room and came with monthly maintenance fees and a water bill. Still, the letter asked me to consider alternative approaches to fencing that don't isolate community members. I folded the letter, set it on the counter, and stared at it. Jason walked in, saw my face, and immediately asked, "Is it Karen again?" I nodded. Now she's trying to get the HOA to tell us how to fence our own yard. He gave me a flat look. Should have put up barbed wire. She'd probably report us to the Geneva Convention. Over dinner that night, we talked about it as a family. My wife suggested we attend the next HOA meeting, just to clarify things before they got twisted even more. It sounded reasonable. Civil, even. We agreed to go. The meeting was held in the community center on Thursday evening. We walked in to find a folding table, half a dozen plastic chairs, a plate of stale cookies, and Karen sitting front and center like she was running for mayor. As soon as we sat down, she stood up. "I think we all need to talk about property access and neighborly consideration," she began, already playing to the room. "There are certain households," she glanced at us, not subtly, "that have created a hostile atmosphere with locked gates and security cameras pointed at public walkways." Public walkways? The side gate barely saw foot traffic unless you were walking straight into our backyard. I raised my hand and waited until Karen finished one of her long-winded, passive-aggressive sentences. "For the record," I said calmly, "our backyard is not public. Neither is our pool." We added the gate latch because someone, without permission, entered our yard, swam in our pool, and refused to leave when asked. Karen gasped like I'd accused her of grand theft. I had heat exhaustion. "You trespassed. And your son locked me in. He secured the gate. That's different. You were never in danger." The room went quiet. A few heads turned toward the HOA chair, an older gentleman named Mike who looked like he regretted showing up. He cleared his throat. "Well, as long as there's no ordinance being broken, we don't have authority to enforce backyard access. We do ask for courtesy. But in this case, sounds like a private matter." Karen didn't sit down. "So you're just going to let people install fences and lock everyone else out? What kind of community is this?" Mike gave her a tired look. "The kind where people stay in their own yards." She sat down, fuming. The meeting moved on, but Karen kept stealing glances at us like the whole evening had been a personal betrayal. Jason leaned over and whispered, "I give it 2 days before she pulls something again." He overestimated her patience. The next morning, while I was at work, my wife called. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the frustration under the surface. "She just showed up again," she said. "Didn't knock. Walked straight into the yard while I was watering the plants." "What?" "She said she wanted to inspect the latch." I felt my jaw clench. "Did you tell her to leave?" "Of course I did. I said if she comes back uninvited again, I'll be the one calling the police." She said we're the ones creating a dangerous environment and that she has a right to speak up. That evening, I added a second padlock. Nothing fancy, just something to reinforce the message. A day later, we got a notice taped to our front door. A formal complaint, again from Karen, this time filed with the city. She claimed we had installed a structure that violated residential code and obstructed neighborhood safety protocols. The pool fence that I called the city office myself. The clerk I spoke with sounded amused more than anything. "Yes sir, we received the complaint," she said. "No, you're not in violation. You actually went beyond the minimum safety requirement. We've had a few creative submissions from your neighbor before. Noted, I said, biting back a groan. Still, I wasn't about to let this turn into an endless game of accusations and paperwork. I printed out the local zoning and safety guidelines and highlighted the parts that clearly protected our right to fence and secure our pool. I dropped off a copy at the next HOA bulletin meeting and taped another to our front door, just in case Karen came snooping again. That Saturday, it happened again that I was in the kitchen when I heard Jason call out, "Dad? You need to come see this." I stepped outside and saw Karen at the edge of our property, standing just outside the locked gate. She had a clipboard in one hand and what looked like a tape measure in the other. "I'm conducting an independent inspection," she announced. "You're what now?" She ignored me and began writing something down on the clipboard. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "this is bordering on harassment. You've come onto our property without permission multiple times now. This isn't how neighbors handle things." She snapped the clipboard shut. "You think I'm the problem? I'm trying to make this neighborhood safe. By measuring fences you don't own? If you just unlock the gate and let people cool off once in a while, none of this would be happening." Jason muttered, "She thinks she's the pool sheriff." Karen didn't hear him, or chose not to. She turned and stormed off again, muttering something about legal recourse. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the calendar. I didn't want to spend another summer watching my backyard every time I heard footsteps. I didn't want my wife worried every time she watered the plants or Jason feeling like he had to defend himself every weekend. But it was clear that Karen wasn't going to stop because we were being reasonable. That I realized something then. She didn't actually want the pool. Not really. She wanted control. She wanted the ability to walk into someone's life, take what she felt entitled to, and have them smile and nod while she did it, and when she didn't get that, she pushed harder. So we decided not to push back. Not directly. Not yet. Instead, we got quiet. Careful. Thoughtful, because if Karen was going to keep escalating, we needed to be one step ahead. Always, Jason, sitting across from me with a pencil in hand, looked up from his notebook and grinned. "I have an idea." I raised an eyebrow. "The legal kind?" He nodded. "Mostly." And that was the first time I realized this wasn't just going to be a one-time conflict. This was going to be a war of patience. Of planning, and we were done playing defense. We didn't retaliate right away. That was the key. Karen expected us to react, to yell back, to fight fire with fire. But that wasn't our plan. If she was going to spend her summer testing boundaries, we'd spend ours reinforcing them, subtly, carefully, and above all, legally. It started with a meeting at the hardware store. Jason and I stood in front of a wall of locks, latches, motion lights, and signage, weighing our options. "We're not building a bunker," I said, eyeing a motion alarm that promised to notify 3 emergency contacts within 10 seconds of detecting movement. Jason held up a small keypad lockbox. "No bunker. Just enough that she can't come and go like it's a public beach." We settled on a stronger gate latch with a combination lock, a small sign that read, "Private property, do not enter," and 2 solar-powered motion lights that would blink on if anyone approached the fence after dark. Everything was easy to install and within code. By Sunday afternoon, it was all in place. The fence wasn't just locked, it now looked deliberate. Legitimate. We had a small camera above the gate, just visible enough to suggest accountability without looking like paranoia. Nothing excessive. Just a quiet signal that our patience had an expiration date. Karen noticed immediately. She passed by twice that day, slower than usual, her eyes scanning the gate like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She didn't say anything. That silence told us everything. The next morning, we received a call from Mike, the HOA chair. "Look, I know we've been over this," he said, sounding apologetic, "but Karen filed another complaint. This time, she's saying your new hardware is psychologically aggressive." I laughed. Is that a real phrase? It is now, apparently. But again, we're not acting on it. You've done everything by the book. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Appreciated, I said. I think she's just running out of steam. Or fuel. Mike muttered that we kept our heads down the rest of that week. No escalation. No comments. No interaction. And slowly, things began to quiet down. For about 5 days, then came Saturday that I was inside finishing up bills when Jason called me from the backyard. His voice was flat, too calm. You'll want to see this. I stepped outside and found him standing near the pool, pointing toward the far end of the yard. The lockbox was open, the gate slightly ajar. Nothing was broken, just open. I locked it this morning, he said. Me too, I added. Double-checked before breakfast. Karen wasn't in the yard. No footprints. No noise. Just that unlocked gate, swinging a little in the breeze that we checked the footage. The camera didn't catch much, just some movement at the edge of the lens, as if someone had approached from the side and reached in without fully entering the view. Clever, she's getting bolder, Jason said, frowning. She's testing us. I replied that I went to the garage and grabbed a second camera, this one with a wider angle. Installed it on the opposite side of the gate where she tried to avoid detection. Then I added a small alarm that would chime inside the house if the gate opened during certain hours. Not to startle anyone, just to notify. Still, it felt like a line had been crossed. She wasn't just wandering now. She was probing. And if she could bypass a lockbox once, she could do it again. That night, after dinner, we sat at the table going over footage again. Jason tapped his fingers restlessly. We're being careful, but it's not enough, he said. She's just going to keep trying. We're not giving her a reason to escalate, I reminded him. That matters. Jason nodded slowly, then leaned back. Then maybe it's time we show her what subtle looks like from our side. I raised an eyebrow. You've got something? He grinned. Give me a day. The next morning, he was out early. He took a measuring tape, some printed signs, and a fresh sheet of clear contact paper. He worked for an hour under the sun while I watched from the kitchen window, curious but trusting. When I finally came out to see, I laughed. Just above the gate, neatly laminated and sealed from weather, was a sign that read, Pool Maintenance Schedule, Property Owner Access Only, Unlicensed Entry Prohibited, Water Treated with Chlorine Level Monitoring. Not safe for unprotected exposure. It was official enough to cause hesitation, but vague enough to avoid legal scrutiny. Jason had included a diagram of pool circulation zones, a made-up municipal code reference, and even a contact email. His school spam account. Of course, she wants to play watchdog, he said, shrugging. We just gave her a warning label. I couldn't stop smiling. That's annoyingly brilliant. She won't come near that gate again without second-guessing herself. And he was right. Karen walked past twice that day. Both times, she slowed down in front of the sign, squinting at the technical jargon like it was a nuclear warning label. She didn't touch the gate. Didn't even walk close enough to trigger the motion lights, but she wasn't done. 3 days later, we found a note taped to the fence. No envelope, just a folded piece of printer paper. You think you're clever. But I've lived here longer than you. I know how this street works. No one fences out neighbors. It's not right that you're not better than anyone, you just have a pool. No signature. But she didn't need one. I showed it to Jason, and he read it once. Then again, she's not mad about the gate, he said. She's mad we're not treating her like she's special. That nailed it. This had never been about swimming. It was about entitlement. Control. She didn't want to be told no, and now that she'd been told, firmly and repeatedly, she was spiraling. I filed the note away with the other documentation. If it ever came to legal action, I wanted everything documented. We let a week pass without responding. Karen didn't say anything either, but the tension was there. Quiet, stretched across our property line like a tightrope. Then, on a quiet Sunday evening, I got a call. It was from Alan, the neighbor next door. He sounded uncomfortable. Hey, just a heads up. Karen came by earlier asking questions about your pool. She wanted to know if you'd ever offered it to anyone else. Said she was collecting statements. I sighed. Statements for what? He hesitated. She didn't say. Just, sounded like she was trying to build a case about something. I told her we mind our own business and walked away. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate you letting me know. I hung up and looked at Jason. She's fishing. For what? A lawsuit? Maybe. Maybe just leverage. Then we give her neither. That night, I drafted a letter, not for Karen, but for the HOA. Not a complaint, not an accusation. Just a record of the past few weeks. Documented dates, descriptions, footage logs, and copies of the note. I attached it all in an email to Mike and asked that it be filed, in case things escalated further. The next morning, Mike called. I'll be honest, he said. We've had issues with her before. But this? This is on a different level. Just want it on record, I said. In case she pushes harder. You're doing the right thing. Stay calm, stay smart. We did, for now, because Karen had backed off, for the moment, but not out, and we knew better than to assume this was over. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that slides by quietly, no wind, no noise, just the heat sitting heavy in the air like it had nowhere else to be. Jason was at work. I had just finished folding laundry when I heard the gate chime. Soft, like a whisper through the wall. That I glanced at the monitor. The camera feed showed the side of the house, a corner of our fence, and one figure, small, hunched, familiar. Karen. She wasn't just standing at the gate this time. She was inside it. I dropped the laundry basket and crossed the living room in 4 strides, unlocking the back door and stepping out with a calmness I didn't feel. Karen was by the pool, crouched, her hand in the water. Can I help you? I asked, my voice even. She flinched, just slightly, and stood slowly, smoothing her skirt like she'd been invited. I was checking the water, she said. Someone told me the chlorine was too high. Thought I'd see for myself. Karen, I said, careful to keep my tone measured, you are trespassing. Again. She blinked at me, as if she hadn't heard the word before. I'm a neighbor, she said. Not a stranger. That doesn't change the fact that you opened a locked gate. There's no misunderstanding left here. She crossed her arms. You act like this is a fortress. It's a backyard. It's my backyard, I replied. You've crossed too many lines. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I walked inside and called the non-emergency police line. I explained everything, the gate, the footage, the history. The officer on the phone listened patiently, then asked the same question I'd been dreading. Is she still on your property? I looked out the window. Karen was gone. By the time a patrol car rolled up an hour later, the yard was empty. But I showed them the footage, the motion chime, the time stamp, Karen leaning over the water with her hand dipped like she had any right to be there. The officer nodded. This isn't a criminal trespass case yet. But if she comes back, file immediately. Today, we'll do a welfare knock. Make it official that there's been a complaint. He took a copy of the footage on a USB stick and left. I didn't feel better. Just tired. Jason came home that evening and listened to everything while standing in the kitchen, silent, his jaw tight. She's not going to stop, he said finally. She thinks she's still in control. She won't be for long, I said. That week, we got quiet support from unexpected places. A neighbor named Clara, who lived 3 houses down, dropped by with lemon bars and said, "You're not the first she's done this to. You're just the first who didn't cave." Mike from the HOA called again. He'd received an anonymous complaint, obviously Karen, accusing us of contaminating community water runoff from our pool. It was nonsense, and he knew it. She's pushing everywhere she can, he said. But she's getting sloppy. Then came the hearing notice. A formal HOA review session had been scheduled to discuss neighborhood disturbances related to property access disputes. Karen had submitted her complaint in writing. And we were invited to respond, on record. Jason sat at the dining table, reading the letter. She's trying to force us into defending ourselves like we're the problem. And we're not going to take the bait, I said. We're going to tell the truth. The meeting took place in the clubhouse, 3 streets over. Folding chairs. Lukewarm coffee. 7 people from the HOA board sat at a plastic table with nameplates. Karen sat on the opposite side of the room, arms crossed, expression smug. When they called us up, I brought the binder, dates, photos, printed screenshots from the camera, a timeline of events. Jason spoke first. We've lived here 3 years. We've tried to be quiet neighbors. But we installed a pool last summer, and since then, we've experienced repeated, uninvited visits from the same neighbor. We installed a fence, posted signage, and even adjusted camera placement. Still, the intrusions continued. I passed the binder to the board. Karen laughed. Actually laughed. This is ridiculous, she said. They locked off a pool from the entire neighborhood. That's not normal. It's a slap in the face. A woman on the board named Angela leaned forward. Ms. Summers, she said. Do you have any written agreement that entitles you to use their pool? Karen's lips tightened. It's always been an unspoken agreement on this street. We share. We don't act like landlords. Angela nodded, calm. And yet you've entered their property multiple times without permission. Do you deny that? I deny that it was criminal, Karen said. It was neighborly concern. Jason cleared his throat. We have footage from 3 separate days. One instance, she bypassed a locked gate. Another time, she was touching the water, saying she was testing chlorine levels. Karen opened her mouth, but Mike raised his hand. I think we've heard enough, he said. We'll review the documentation and respond in writing. We left the clubhouse quietly, but Karen didn't. She stayed behind, arguing with one of the board members, her voice low and clipped. We didn't linger to hear it. 3 days later, a notice arrived in our mailbox. It wasn't public, but it was formal. The HOA had ruled in our favor. Karen had been issued a warning for repeated boundary violations. If she entered our property again without consent, we were advised to call the police and press charges, and the HOA would support the claim. It felt like justice. Quiet, restrained, but justice nonetheless. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and lit our backyard in gold, Jason and I sat by the pool. No music. No conversation. Just the steady chirp of crickets and the soft ripple of water. I don't think she's done, Jason said. No, I agreed. But she's been warned. And this time, she knows we'll follow through. We watched the motion light blink on at the gate. Nothing there, just a cat, maybe. Still, it made me feel better knowing it worked. A few days later, Clara passed by while walking her dog. She stopped at the fence. Just so you know, she said with a wink, she's been quiet lately. Grumpier than ever, but quiet. Quiet's good, I said. Quiet means she knows she lost, Clara replied. You handled it better than most. I thanked her and waved her off, feeling a strange peace settle in. Not celebration, not triumph. Just peace. The kind you get when you stop waiting for someone to change, and instead change how you deal with them. Karen still lives there. We still see her, passing by with narrowed eyes, sometimes muttering under her breath. But she hasn't touched the gate again. She walks a little faster now. Looks a little smaller, and the sign still hangs there, laminated and sun-faded, property owner access only, unlicensed entry prohibited. We never took it down. Some things are worth saying, even when no one's around to argue.